Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our author event. My name's Kafi. I'm the Adult and Teen Services Programmer for Orange County Public Library, and I'd love to welcome you. Thanks so much for coming. We always try to have author events in November for Writing Month, and so I'm so grateful that everyone is able to participate and join us. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping things. We do ask you to keep your mic muted. Feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen in order to answer questions, and I'll get to as many as I can before we end. Also, remember that technical difficulties can happen. Just be patient with us. We're having an author that's having a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we'll get it sorted out. And also that this event is being recorded for people who can't join us live right now. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Nora for introductions and to get things started. Nora?
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to do a quick screen share, so bear with me just a moment. There we go. I'm Nora Gaskin, and I'm very glad to be here tonight with three wonderful writers, Miranda Kossoff, Mary Beth Dunn, and Walter Bennett. I'm a writer myself. I also work as a developmental editor, and I have a very small, non-traditional publishing company called Listra Books. It was through my editing and publishing that I met the other three writers on the panel tonight. Their books are really excellent, and I'm very proud of having been involved in bringing them into the world. These are the covers of my three books, and I'm going to show you the covers of the other authors' books in a few minutes as well. I am a lifelong resident of Orange, Durham, and Chatham counties. I have a bachelor's from UNC in English with honors in creative writing. I have a master's degree in English from the University of Washington in Seattle. My first novel, published novel, is Until Proven. It's a mystery. It was released in October 2012. Then I wrote a small nonfiction book, Time of Death, which is related to Until Proven, as I'll explain in a few minutes. And then in 2018, I published another novel, The Worst Thing. For more about my books, or just to follow me and see what's going on in the writing, in my little slice of the writing world, you can go to my website, noragaskin.com. You can contact me through the website, and you'll find me on Facebook as Nora Gaskin Author on Facebook. Miranda Kossoff wrote a memoir, The Rope of Life. She has been a chameleon in her work life, from medical social worker, assistant managing editor of a large newspaper, communications director in academia and nonprofit, a freelancer, a metalsmith, and jewelry designer. Her essays in creative writing have been published, excuse me, in a number of outlets. She wrote a weekly column for a local paper for quite a while. She's been an essayist and commentator on UNC Public Radio. And she taught essay writing at Duke in continuing education. The Rope of Life, her memoir, is her first published full-length book. You can find Miranda at mirandakossoff.com. You can contact her through that website, and you can also find her on Facebook. So please follow Miranda on social media. Walter Bennett published his book, The Last First Kiss, earlier this year. He's a writer, a former lawyer and judge, and a law professor. He lives in Chapel Hill. His first novel, Leaving Tuscaloosa, won the Alabama Authors Award and was a finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction and the Crooks Corner Book Prize for debut novels set in the American South. He has published short fiction and essays in both print and online journals. He has written numerous articles on the law and a highly acclaimed book, The Lawyer's Myth, Reviving Ideals in the Legal Profession. And that was published by the University of Chicago Press. The Last First Kiss is his second novel. Walter's website is walterbennett.com. You can reach him through the website, and you can also find him on Facebook. So again, please follow all of us on social media. Mary Bess Dunn is the author of a collection of short stories called Fate Havens. Mary Bess retired from a career as a teacher educator. She continues to follow her lifelong passion for literature and writing. One of her stories was a nominee for the Pushcart Prize. Her work has appeared in several literary journals. Mary Bess is an avid cyclist who also enjoys yoga, pickleball, travel, playing the piano, and hugging the grandkids. She is a lifelong resident of Nashville, Tennessee. Mary Bess's website is marybessdunn.com. You can reach her through that website and follow her also on Facebook. And most of us are on other social media as well. So start with Facebook and then look around. You'll find us in other places too. All of our books are available through the online booksellers you're probably familiar with and through your favorite independent bookstores. Your independent bookstore will be able to order it for you if they don't have it in stock. And we're all donating copies of our books to the Orange County Library as well. So you'll find them there one fine day. I'm going to begin by, excuse me, I'm going to stop the sharing.
Get you anything.
I'm going to begin by talking a little bit more about my own work. I'm going to read from the small book, the nonfiction book I wrote, Time of Death. I'm going to read from the very beginning of it and then talk about the novels. Time of Death is about a murder that happened in Chapel Hill when I was growing up. I was 12 years old when this murder took place, and it made a big impression on me. And this is how I began the book. December 24th, 1963, 8:45 a.m. Stanley Forte pulled up in front of friend Frank Rinaldi's house and honked the car horn. Frank came out and got in. "Together again, baby," Frank said, and they set off, driving the 12 miles or so from Chapel Hill to Durham to go Christmas shopping. They bought gifts for their wives, toys for Stan's two sons, and Frank bought a teddy bear for the baby his wife Lucille was carrying. When they returned to Frank's duplex apartment at 105 North Street in Chapel Hill at about 1:30 p.m., they found that Lucille had been struck on the head, gagged, strangled, and suffocated. She and her baby were both dead. By 6 p.m., Frank was in jail, charged with murder. Thus began an ordeal that lasted for 2 years and a lifetime. Frank would be tried twice for the crime of murder. He was convicted in the first trial and spent a year in prison, held in seclusion on death row, although he had not been sentenced to death. It was deemed to be for his safety. Frank was supported by a number of friends, including my father, James Gaskin. Dad was a professor in the English department at UNC, and he held a post in the graduate school that made him an advisor to graduate students. In both of these positions, he would have had a chance to know Frank. I have no reason to believe he was friendlier or closer to Frank than other students until Lucille died and Frank was arrested. My father always believed in Frank's innocence, and so did my mother, my sister, my brother, and I. I was 12, almost 13, in December 1963, and for the next 2 years, my family life revolved around against the backdrop of the Rinaldi case. Dad was actively involved in supporting Frank, even visiting him as often as possible during the year he was in central prison. My mother kept clippings from newspapers that covered the case, and they all did. It was a huge, big deal in Chapel Hill and Orange County at that time. After both she and my dad died, I found the file and brought it home. I didn't read the clippings for quite a while because I was afraid to. As a grown-up, I knew that pregnant women who are murdered are most often murdered by the fathers of their babies. And I knew then, as a grown-up, how rare a really random murder is. My dad never wavered on the question of Frank's innocence. I know that because I spoke with him about it late in his life. I feared that I would read the clippings and find doubt in my own mind. It wasn't doubt about Frank's innocence that worried me. It was doubt about my father's judgment. I need not have feared. When I read the clippings, not once, but a number of times, I found that my own belief in Frank's innocence grew stronger and stronger. So did my desire to understand why he was arrested so quickly, why no real unbiased investigation took place, and why an innocent man who was the victim of a terrible crime and not the perpetrator was convicted. I believe that the case held up a mirror for my small and at that time idealized hometown that was finding itself invaded by the larger world, as so many small towns in the South were in the early and mid 1960s. The reflection wasn't pretty, but it has been compelling to me. So that's the end of my reading from the beginning of the book. Because of my dad's involvement, my whole family really was involved in this, in the 2-year process of Frank being set free. I was at a very impressionable age, and it was a revelation to me that a pregnant woman could be murdered, that an innocent man could be tried and convicted. How could any of that have happened, especially not in the southern part of heaven, in our little village where no one even locked their doors? The questions lingered with me for decades. I believe in the power of fiction to reveal and tell truths. So finally, the time came for me to write a novel with characters and a plot that would help me explore the lingering questions from the Rinaldi case. I wanted to lay some ghosts to rest for myself, and I hoped readers would be intrigued as well. In Until Proven, the novel that came out of this story, Until Proven, Pittsboro County Courthouse on the front. In Until Proven, in that novel, again, it is a novel, there are 2 murders that happen 40 years apart. They involve different generations of the same 2 large, overlapping, and interconnected families in the community. One of the murders is solved, and the other one isn't. When I was doing readings from the book, when it was first published, I gave that description that one of the murders is not solved. And one of the first questions I got was, how could you leave a murder unsolved? And well, that's because Lucille Rinaldi's murder is unsolved. And there are many unsolved murders out there. I think one of the reasons why those of us who like to read mysteries and crime books like them is that we do have a desire to see order restored. And we like that about them usually, that they are going to tie up those loose ends. But sometimes in real life, we don't get answers. So we don't get an answer to the crime in the novel Until Proven that is a parallel to the Lucille Rinaldi murder. My next novel is The Worst Thing, and it's suspense. We know right away who the bad guy is. He is the first person in that book to even speak to us. So we know right away who the bad guy is. His name is Albert. He is a point of view character. We do go into his head, which is sometimes not a comfortable place to be, but we go there anyway. The story involves 2 young women who are very close friends and whose lives fall under the shadow of Albert and his craziness. And the plot is, the big question of the plot is, can we stop him? And can we keep him from doing more damage in the world? So Until Proven is set in a fictional town called Piedmont, North Carolina. It's fictional, but it's very familiar ground to me. It's a mashup of Chapel Hill and Durham with a little Chatham County scenery thrown in. And as I've said, it was my attempt to work out questions that had lingered with me for decades. The Worst Thing takes place in a big city, much like New York, although I never call it New York because I wanted to be free to rearrange the physical layout of the city to suit the story. But it's definitely a large city. It's in the Northeast. I've never lived in a city like that. I've been very fortunate in my life. I've avoided the Alberts of the world. The title comes from something that happens to the main character a young woman named Kella when she's growing up. When she's 15, her parents are killed in a freak accident. And at their funeral, she overhears somebody say, well, at least Kella knows the worst thing that ever will happen to her already has happened to her. Kella overhears that. And when I came up with that line, then it came clear to me that what I wanted to write about was what if you believe that? What if you believe that the worst thing that ever could happen to you had already happened? How would that impact your life? How would you live your life with that certainty? And what if it wasn't true? What if there was something worse out there? So that was really how that story got launched in my own head. But again, these were things I have not experienced. So in my first novel, I'm on very familiar territory with very familiar characters. I could tell you which one of those characters reminded me of my Aunt Tib or my Uncle Ned. And then when I sat down to write the worst thing, I went in completely the opposite direction and set it in a place I don't know with people who were strangers to me. So I really had to figure them out and learn a lot about them as I went. So that's just an observation about my two novels and something about how my brain was working in those two. So whatever you're working on, go where it takes you. And that's a question I wanted to ask those of you who are writing, especially in this month of November. My question would be, are you pantsers or planners? I'm a pantser, meaning I write by the seat of my pants. I don't outline my books, but I know that many other writers do. They feel lost if they don't have a plan, but even with everything is worked out as much as possible before they even start putting words on paper. So to any of you who are working on novels this month, do what feels right to you. Brains work differently. Don't let anybody try to put you in a box you're not going to fit in. So figure out, are you a pantser or a planner, and go with it. I start a novel with questions I want to answer. And I start with a sense of who the characters are. I start with a sense of place and with a notion of what needs to be true at the end. I won't say I know what the ending is, but I know what needs to be true at the end. And that those things are what get me going, what get me started. Then my first draft is going to be me wandering in the wilderness, figuring out what the connections are, figuring out how to get these characters and myself from word one, sentence one, page one, chapter one, to that truth that I'm aiming for at the end of the book. So the first draft will involve a lot of gaps and inconsistencies and false starts and backtracking. And that has to be okay with any writer. I think whether you've begun with an ironclad plan or you're a pantser like me, that first draft is going to be a messy thing. Well, you're going to write 3, 4, 5, 6 drafts. So you're going to have a lot of time to fix those things. Just let them be, just go where it takes you in that first draft, see what you wind up with. I've come to realize that my first draft is my outline. I'm working on another novel, and I went on a writing retreat back at the end of August, and I hope to come home from that retreat ready to start the first draft, which meant I really had to figure out those last connections and the last paths from A to Z, and then I could start the second draft. And I found myself really looking forward to the second draft. That was a little bit of a new feeling for me because I've always really enjoyed the first draft most. I've enjoyed that process of exploring without feeling a lot of pressure to get it right the first time. So I took it that I've grown a notch as a writer when I realized, hey, I'm ready now for the second draft and I'm looking forward to it. So if you're just beginning a novel this month, or sometime soon you're thinking about it, then I can't say relax in the first draft because it can be a challenge, but go where it takes you and you're going to have plenty of time to do the cleanup later. So that would be my bit of advice on craft. So Walter, I think we'll go to you next. If you'll unmute yourself.
Thank you, Nora.
Right, and share what you like with our visitors.
All right, thank you. And thanks to Orange County Public Library for inviting me onto this august panel. I'm honored to be here. Um, the novel that I have recently finished, which Nora mentioned, is called The Last First Kiss. It's a story about two people in their later years who are reflecting back over their lives, or at least that's what they think they're doing. They were former high school sweethearts, which would probably have been 50 years ago. And they have lived separate lives, somewhat fraught lives. And on a whim, they decide to reconnect at the beach house of Ace, the male protagonist. The woman's name is Janelle, and they decide to meet at this beach house for a weekend to sort of go back over the good old days in high school. Um, the setting is on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. That's purposeful, and I may get into that in a minute. The idea is that they go there with these sort of romantic and innocent ideas, and pretty soon they're in over their heads with these memories, trying to figure out, in fact, what happened. And that leads them into examination not only of their time together before, but of their lives. And this is punctuated by a hurricane that is hovering off the Outer Banks that they ignore until it's too late, and the hurricane hits, and the story spins on from there. I won't go into any more detail about that. But the original idea of this was, or the idea that emerged, I should say, was to start looking at how we look at memories and how we look at our past and how we interpret it and how that affects the future and the present, I would say. I guess at this point should probably, well, before I do that, let me give you an idea, sort of as along some of the lines Nora has been talking about, of how the idea of this novel came about. I'm a pantser, by the way, and proud of it, and I couldn't do it any other way. It keeps me in trouble all the time, but I wouldn't be able to write a planned book. It's sort of an adventure, and that's sort of how I go about it. This novel came about, I'm in the midst of writing and have been for 10 or 12 years. I don't even recall when I started. A much longer involved novel, and I have left it several times. And about 2 years ago, I left it because ideas started bubbling up in my head. One of those was the idea of going back and looking at older people or persons, going back and looking at something that happened in their lives. And it struck me that a high school romance would be a good idea because that occurs in very tender formative years and would be something that would really stick and generate a lot of memories. The other idea that sort of collided with that was the idea of a doomed house on the ocean, sort of lingering on the edge of the future, which is environmental issues coming our way very fast. And the idea of the house out there, and in this story, it's a very old house, out there, probably waiting for the next hurricane or even sea rise eventually, seemed a good idea for a novel. So those two ideas sort of came together, and then other ideas began to constellate around those. And I just one day sat down and started writing. And I think, I could be wrong on this, maybe Nora could correct me, but I think the first paragraph is pretty much the way I wrote it. And so that's how it came about, and progressed from there. And I will add that when I finished this novel, and even when Nora and I finished this novel, I didn't know a lot about it. And the more I talk to people about it and the more I hear from other people about it, the more I realize that there's a lot more to it, or at least than I thought there was. So here's the novel again, and here's the excerpt. This occurs when Janelle and Ace are having lunch on Saturday. The novel starts on Thursday, ends on Monday. And they've been together a day and a couple of nights, and they're going back over old memories. One of them is one she describes that was very meaningful to her when they were together. A Christmas Eve evening after a church service, and it was around midnight. They were driving home, and they stopped in a shadowy part of town to make out, and the cops came. And one of the cops gets on his high horse and delivers a sermon to them about evils of the flesh, and focuses particularly on her when he finds out that she's a year older than he is. So this reading picks up there. Janelle is speaking. The cops have just let them go, and they're driving off. Yes, she said, they finally let us go, and you drove away with that red light still flashing through the rear window of the car. It was like it was following us, following me. And with every blink of it came a huge flash of shame and then anger, so that I began to shake. That creep, what right did he have? And you put your hand on mine, and I took it and squeezed it. And it was like you were pulling me out of the hell he had cast me into with his wandering flashlight and dirty little mind. Ace was never aware he'd had that effect on her, ever. Rescuer, source of comfort by the mere touch of his hand. I did that, he says. Her smile is gone now. There's a new eagerness in her eyes. Yes, you did, and it rescued me from the burn that flashlight had left on me. It took me back to all the good things we had before Reggie, the cop, came along with his stupid sermon and heavy breathing. Ace can almost feel the breathy warmth of the car's dark interior as it carried them through that Christmas Eve night. Hear the tinny rattle of the fan in the car's foot heater. Smell the butt-slick vinyl seats. Yes, so warm and close, and yet he had had no idea what was going on in the head of the girl next to him with her fingers wrapped in his, though he must have seen and heard everything she did. Everything this older Janelle has just described. The fire-breathing sermon, the wandering flashlight beam, the heaving uniformed chest, the red light from the cop car flashing in his rear-view mirror as he drove away. Had he ever seen what was in her head? And how about her feelings, like the ones she's just shared from that night? Did he ever have a clue? And that's a vignette of the discovery that they go through about themselves as well as each other. And I would say that I think Ace has a lot more to discover about himself than she does. I will say a few other things about writing. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I'm sure this connects with some of the other things we've been talking about why I write. I've been writing now, trying to write fiction now for over 20 years, well, actually longer than that, because I probably started when, in my head at least, when I was a kid and through all the rest of my life. But I've seriously been trying for about 20 years. And it's a lonely life in a lot of ways. And it also is one that sometimes seems hopeless, or it did to me. People would say, oh, well, keep at it, you know, someday everything will be great and you'll publish and da-da-da-da-da. Well, yes, maybe, but we all know that there's no guarantee at all that that's going to happen. And I would venture to say that 95 to 99% of what I write never sees the light of day in terms of other people reading it. So I've begun to think about why I do this. What's going on in my head when I write that keeps me at it? And I do it, I guess, for two reasons. One is enjoyment. I like doing it. The whole imaginative process, the creative process, finding a story, learning where it goes, and trying to put it out there for others as well as I can do that. But there's something much more than that, and that's what intrigues me. And I think what that has to do with is the idea that sometimes, that somewhere, somehow, someone else will read this and understand it. And by that, I mean not only understand the story and where it goes, sort of the play by play, but understand what is going on when I write, the sort of the mix of intellectual energy and emotions that go on frequently unconsciously, and sometimes no more than just a guess or intimation as I'm writing. The hope that that will connect with someone else out there on a level of shared emotion and insight. This is almost an ache as I write, and it's not palpable all the time, and sometimes it's unperceived, but that's what drives it for me, that someone will get the sensibility of that I'm feeling, and life with all its joys and pains that I'm trying to express. That's very rewarding when that happens. Of course, if you don't publish or get it out there, the folks who do that are going to be limited. And it's finally occurred to me that I count on myself as a listener, and I don't even I don't think I consciously do that, but I assume that there's someone there who is listening to this, and I'm trying to get this across to them, and that's someone who's in my head. And I don't have a face for it, so I guess in some sense it's some alternate version of me. So you might think about that. I think that's a real driving force for me, and it even if it does not come to fruition, that you connect with someone else on it, and then there's always someone around to read it, of course, friends and spouses and partners. That in itself is satisfying. Okay, I've enjoyed talking, and I will pass this on to Mary Bess Dunn, who's written a terrific collection of short stories. Mary Bess.
All right, thank you, Walter. Thank the Orange County Library Association for inviting me from, since I'm not in North Carolina. I am also pantser, as Nora says. I am a late bloomer. I know when I started seriously writing when I turned 50, and signed up for a workshop, a writer's workshop at Vanderbilt as a birthday present to myself. And I just haven't stopped since. My novel, Fate Havens, is a collection of short stories, linked short stories that most of them have been published in various literary journals around through the ages, through the years. And let's see, I never considered tying them together until I read Elizabeth Strauss' Olive Kitteridge, and saw what was possible. And so I went back and looked at my characters, and it occurred to me that they're all kind of working in the same sphere. They certainly live in the same town, Nashville. Why couldn't they live in the same, being part of the same family? So the more I thought about it, I thought I took it on as writing it as a novel, putting together as a novel, and it was challenging. But now looking at the novel and looking at the characters, and looking at Rosalind and William and Ruth and Billy and Rosalie and their friends, it just seems obvious that they're all part of a whole, kind of a dizzy, provocative whole. They're all Southerners who are trying to make sense and navigate their way through changes, upheavals really, from the 1950s into the 21st century. And so I think it all worked well. It was a challenge. It's more difficult than it sounds. So I write about acceptance, being true to oneself while also making peace with unsettling situations and unsettling people and family members. Let's see, my storylines in this novel, and they deal with like parents and children, with sexual orientation, with questions of God and spirituality, of class, dementia, friends, loyalty, education, let's see what else, marriage, a little bit of everything, even though it's not a big book, but those issues are all covered in one way or another and examined through the characters in the book. I thought I'd read from the opening scene this tonight, because this is the scene where you meet the main family. You meet Rosalind and William and their two children, Ruth and Billy. So just give you a flavor of what the book is about. The chapter is called Worthy. It is a fall morning in a Nashville suburb in 1958. Rosalind Hanson Myers, no longer a newlywed or a new mother, or a new mother, understands that the house, their new house on a cul-de-sac of new houses, will have to do. Rosalind whites the bread with mayonnaise while the bacon burns, and then reaches in her pocket for a smoke. She bites her lip, longing for the lucky strike that isn't there. The bacon spits as she moves it from the pan to a square of paper towel. She wants this morning over, but first things first. At the whiff of Old Spice, she checks her watch, but knows it's 7:10. William strides in, so handsome in his suit pants and blue shirt with the navy tie she bought at Mallory's for Christmas. I feel a draft. He frowns toward the window. She's open just a crack. William is a stickler for keeping the house closed tight. No use paying to warm the outside, Rosalind repeats to herself. She steals a breath of fresh air before reaching over the sink to tug the window shut. William unlocks the back door, and Rosalind watches him march deliberately down the drive. He walks without looking at the yard where she's planted pansies and yellow chrysanthemums, or the sky, which hints at rain. She wonders if the neighbors think he's handsome. William picks up the newspaper and reads it as he returns to the house. The kids trail in, first 10-year-old Ruth, her curly hair tamed with gold barrettes, and then Billy, taller than his sister, but younger by 18 months. William joins them at the table. William joins them as they take their places at what he often teases is this strange round table she's convinced him to buy. He props the paper against the table's even stranger Lazy Susan. Look here, he says. They're coming out with a musical about the war, South Pacific. A musical, like with singing and dancing? Billy asks. Ruth chimes in, that's where you were during the war, right, Daddy? My war was in the Philippines, West, not South Pacific, William says. Rosalind senses the children's interest in their father's war is strained, but whenever he pulls out the photos he took as an Army photographer in the war, their willingness to look seems genuine enough. Once she overheard Ruth bragging to a friend about the scrap of Japanese flag showcased in their den. Daddy's souvenir, she explained, the sun with a bullet hole in the center. Everyone eat up. Dad's dropping you off. Rosalind wraps 2 bologna and cheese sandwiches in wax paper and then packs them with apples in a paper lunch sack. Finally, jackets, lunch bags, satchels, and milk money are all in place. After a flurry of hugs and kisses, Rosalind's little family is out the door. The house is not exactly quiet. There are layers of sounds, though none suspicious. A package is waiting under Rosalind's bed, and she is puzzled at her own reluctance to open it. She stacks the dishes in the sink and grabs a cloth to wipe the table. Through the window over the sink, she sees fists of gray clouds hovering. People ask me, where did the title of my novel, Fate Havens, where did it come from? And actually, Fate Havens is the name of a story that appears towards the end of the book, where Rosalind, who now is struggling with dementia, she's on her way. She drives to the beauty shop and she explains to her hairdresser that she's late because there was traffic on the Fate Havens Bridge. And the hairdresser says, oh, that bridge, it's famous for being where troubled souls take the plunge. And so then Rosalind starts thinking about her options with dementia, and maybe she would take the plunge. That's all I'll say about that. But well, so I've been searching for a title. I had on my legal pad and I just jot it down. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and jot down titles. I'd read it to my book groups, to my family, anybody. I just said, you like this one? What about this one? Well, it wasn't until I met with Nora, and she pointed out that the story Fate Havens is really central to the overarching theme of the book. Maybe I want to consider using that as a title. Well, of course, I mean, it just made perfect sense. Eureka, there it was. You know, and that's just one example. If you have a good publisher or an editor, it just helps make your book so much better. It brings out the best of it. That's just one little example of how Nora helped bring the book out into the world. I'm thinking about what writing advice I would give to participants tonight in thinking about my own history. Something for myself, a quote that I always go back to is Faulkner's. I have this actually written over my desk on a Post-it note. And he says, the human heart in conflict with itself is the only thing worth writing about. And I found that that's really what I'm interested in over the years. I've always kept journals. I say I just started when I turned 50, but I've always kept journals and notes. But if I look at what I write about, it is about conflicts of the heart and human emotion. So when it comes to writing, what to write about, that's what I'm on the hunt for. Let's see, that there's another quote. What is it? Sigmund Nunez says, instead of writing about what you know, which is the old adage, write about what you see. And I would add, write about what you hear. So I'm always looking for concrete examples of human emotion. What does that look like? What are facial expressions, gestures? How does it affect a situation? And I'll write it down in my notebook. And sometimes now I've been just talking in the phone, making notes. I write down conversations. I know other people do this too, but it's true. It's amazing what you hear in restaurants or, in doctor's offices waiting. Even with mask on, people have some fascinating conversations. So I just sit and jot them down. I don't care, and they don't notice me. So that I've even been known to write in a bathroom stall from what's going on around me. It's just what I do, and don't think that you'll remember it when you get home, because you won't. So at least I don't when I get home. So that's what I try to do. Let's see, what else would I advise? During the pandemic, I really got involved or realized the importance of podcasts. So I've started listening to them and learning a lot from so many really good podcasts. I love the New Yorker's writer's voice, and they also have, the New Yorker has a fiction one, and you can just listen to the best of the best short stories. And of course, that's always inspiring. Other writers inspire me. Again, go back to my notebook. I never read a book without a pen in hand and my notebook, because that's where I learn. I learn from other writers. I always feel that they're mentoring me. So it's hard now even to read a book just for enjoyment. I always, how did she do that? How did he do that? Look at that language. So that to me is important as a writer. Speaking of other podcasts, there are wonderful podcasts that invite writers on and interview them about their craft and how their book came to be. Of course, Landis Wade's Charlotte Readers podcast is a favorite. I've learned so much. I always keep my notepad there. And then there's the Writer's Bones. What's another one? Writer's Routine from London is an excellent podcast. And then recently I found one called Wine, Women, and Words. And so it's fascinating. So, but it's not very time consuming, and it's always inspiring. So I think I'm running out of time a little bit here. So I guess my last word of advice would be just simply to beginners and prose writers alike, is just to do it, sit down. Some famous author, and I should know who did this, but said just it's the butt in the chair that gets it done. And I would agree with that. So I guess, so thank you again for having me. And Miranda, I'll turn it over to you. Is she there? You want me to keep talking? Okay.
Can you hear me now?
If you want me to.
I feel like I've been on the space station. Now I can hear myself through the phone. The phone has been the only way that I could hear you all. So I'm going to mute my phone so that there won't be that feedback. And I apologize if you overheard me cursing at myself or whatever, because for the first time in 2 years of Zooming, I could hear everybody and everybody could see me. I mean, everybody could see me and hear me, but I couldn't hear anybody. So I'm starting kind of from a blank. I heard Mary Bess's wonderful presentation and the kind of the tail end of Walter's. So I'm not sure, Nora, did you, wait a minute, I'll have to turn my phone up if you can tell me. Nora, what questions did you want us to address?
Sorry, Miranda, I had muted myself. Just we're ready for your presentation for this evening. Just I think you probably had something to read and talk about your book. So we'd love to hear from you about your book.
Okay. All right, so I'm a bit flustered and lots of things have flown out of my head when I was trying to figure out how to get the sound and the picture together. But without further ado, I'm going to read the prologue to my memoir, The Rope of Life. And thank you, Nora, for that wonderful introduction. Nora's also been my publisher, my content editor, and I can't say enough good things about her. Well, I guess I should preface this just a bit about what the book deals with. It's basically the story of my father and my attempts throughout the years to get close to him, to understand him. He was a Jew who converted to Christianity. He was a World War II war hero, and he was a Gordian knot of contradictions, a man who was a dentist, well-educated, but loved to hang out with the old farmers at Curtis Hank's country store. He ran for public office 3 times and lost every time and blamed himself. So my story deals with growing up in the Jim Crow South, where there was not only racism, but anti-Semitism, and how even though we were brought up as Christians, I can't speak for my siblings, but I felt it. And I also felt a tug from the other side of my family, the Jewish side, because I found them so much more interesting and intellectual and erudite than my Southern Baptist side, who were mostly, different from me. And they used the N-word, and they were not people I wanted to be around. So it was a struggle. And this is the prologue to this memoir, and I'm doing everything backward today, but this is the book. And here's the prologue. On one of my weekend visits home, Dad asked if I wanted to go up in his Cessna with him. Despite my concern about his health and his ability to fly the plane, I agreed. I didn't want to disappoint him, nor did I want him to think I'd lost confidence in him. Dad had flown in World War II, and his wartime memories must have figured large in renewing his pilot's license at age 50. The Cessna 172 Skyhawk wasn't simply a quick way for Dad to get to the Outer Banks for fishing weekends. The Cessna was youth, adventure, camaraderie, and risking life in the service of an ideal. My brother Roger, brother-in-law Kip, and I were the only ones in the family crazy enough to fly with him, and I succumbed only once. We took off from the strip behind the house near Danville for a flyover of Smith Mountain Lake, about 60 miles away, and our cottage with its dock and motorboat. As Dad eased the Cessna into the sky and we gained altitude, I saw the tops of the pine trees surrounding our house and felt the plane shudder as it hit air currents higher up. Geez, Dad, I said, I've never seen a plane this small. It feels like we're puppets on a string being dangled by some giant hand. Yup, it's great, isn't it? Dad replied, looking left and down from his window. But I'm the one who's in control. As he said this, I noticed he was sweating. I don't have a transponder in this plane yet, Dad murmured offhandedly, so I'll have to navigate by landmarks. Oh, great, now he tells me. Then I reminded myself that Dad had flown to the Outer Banks and back several times without incident, that Roger and Kip had survived a couple of flights, so what was I worrying about? Well, which landmarks are we looking for? I asked, wanting to be helpful and at the same time wanting to be sure he was on top of it. We're going to fly west to Martinsville and then up 220 until I see Route 40 to Smith Mountain, Dad said. But how can you tell? There are so many roads down there. I can see the main route and I can see Martinsville. After that, we'll follow the road north until it joins 40. To me, the landscape below is a jumble of trees and ribbons of road. I had to believe that Dad was better at picking out landmarks than I. During the war, hadn't he found bombing targets from above? There it is, he said, jabbing his finger in the air below his window. I looked down and saw the ragged edge of shoreline and the sun glinting diamonds off the surface of the lake. And below was our lakefront cottage, looking like a large Monopoly game piece up the hill from a miniature dock. Remember when I learned to ski and tried to slalom with a non-slalom ski? I twisted my knee when I fell and had to be on crutches when I went back to school that fall. Remember that, Dad? Yeah, sure, Dad said absently. He was focusing on the scene below. I've lost track of 220. We're running low on gas. And I know there's a quicker way back. I'll have to find some different landmarks. A surge of fear heated up my intestines, but I stayed mum. I didn't want to distract him, and I knew I was of no use in helping him navigate us home. Well, I'm not sure where we are right now, Dad chuckled. Maybe he could make light of our situation with false bravado, but it sure wasn't working for me. How much longer do we have on the fuel that's left? I asked. We'll get there before it runs out. Well, that sure is a relief, I said, not meaning to be sarcastic, but fear had overcome tact. Ah, we're east of Martinsville. I can see 54. He sighed, and I exhaled in relief too. Almost home, almost safe. But then I realized we had to land. As the Cessna's wings teetered on approach to the strip of turf behind the house, I could see Dad clench the steering wheel. He was sweating and breathing hard and seemed to have deflated like a tire losing air. I held my breath and gripped the edges of my seat while Dad concentrated on the airstrip between the groves of pine trees below. He made one pass at the strip, but then he pulled up and circled around for another try. As he finally set the wheels down, we bounced like a rubber ball until the Cessna mercifully rolled to a stop. And I spilled out of the cockpit, so delirious to be back on solid ground that I wanted to kneel like the Pope and kiss the earth. Well, Dad, that was quite a ride, I said, more heartily than I was feeling. Next time, I'll give us a smoother landing, he said. Right, Dad, I replied, thinking that there wasn't going to be a next time for me. I'd proven my loyalty, and once would have to be enough. My father had always been a mystery to me, a puzzle comprising many pieces I could never put together. Even as I climbed into the Cessna with him, he was remote and unreadable. He was 53 years old then, not old, and I was 30, not a child, and we were at a crossroads. Debilitating back pain had reduced him to a phantom of his former hyperactive, optimistic self. His confidence was shaky. He worked less and less. He was not the father I knew growing up, the one I looked up to as fearless, strong, funny, protective, and controlling. After college, I fled my hometown to live in Japan, followed a few years later by 9 months in England. While the world was expanding for me, his was shrinking. It frightened me to learn the extent to which he had withered while I was living my life apart from his. So that's the introduction to my book. And I guess people want to know what compels us as writers. And I have to say that after my mother died in 2000, I felt a need to write this book. My father died by his own hand when he was 55 years old in 1980, and my mother lived 20 years beyond him. And I didn't want to write about the things I was discovering while my mother was alive. So I had an essay pulled from what I was writing, published in a book of women's writing. And somehow one of my siblings got wind of it. And so I had a lot of pushback from her not to write. So I shut myself up for 20 years. And as I got older, the voice inside my head was so insistent that you've got to write, you've got to write, you've got to write this. And I was having dinner with a dear friend and I was in tears. I said, I'm depressed and I don't know what to do. This book is killing me. I feel like if I don't write this book, I'm going to die. And that sounds really dramatic, but that's exactly how I felt. And she looked at me and she said, well, write it. And sister, that was all the push I needed. And I wrote like it was pouring out of me. And I'd only written the first 3 or 4 chapters when I started. And I had to do a lot of research, and I had to dredge up memories that I had, for good reason, repressed. And I found methods of doing that. For those of you who write memoir or want to write memoir, you can remember more and more as you go along. And one of the techniques I used was to close my eyes, put myself in that physical situation, be it my uncle's living room, where he made me sit on his lap, that made me feel so queasy, or having to go to the movies with my predator cousin, who was of the kind I didn't like to hang out with. So I just put myself at the movie theater with him. And what were the things I did to distance myself from him, to pretend like I wasn't even with him? He was about 16, 300 pounds, and had acne. And I was 13 or 14. And just for many reasons, I didn't want to be seen with him. And then for other reasons, I didn't want to be around him. So as I was imagining this, the whole scene came up like a movie reel. And I knew exactly what I had done and exactly what I had said to him and exactly how I had managed to put a seat between us in the movie theater. So I will tell you, take heart. Those memories those things you think you can't remember are there. They are there somewhere. And if you are intent, as I was, about getting the story out, then you will remember a lot that you think you can't remember. And I have to say that having finished the book and having it out there was very cathartic for me. And fortunately, it's been well received. I was afraid that, my first book, and it's about me and my family, I was afraid that there would be a lot of negative feedback, but it's been all positive. And I've heard from young people, and they resonate with the story, as well as people my own age. And my book is being used in colleges to have a review written by students, which I find the most wonderful thing to hear about. And the students have written me wanting to use some of the images for my website, and I've given them carte blanche permission. And I said, please, I want to see your review when you're done with it. So what I have to say to you writers out there, and you would-be writers, is it's hard work. It can be very emotional, but if you want to write, like Mary Beth said, sit down and do it. And I'm now writing my second book, which is another kind of a hybrid, but part memoir. And I find that it is pouring out of me, that I can't keep up with the typing. And there have been times when I've been blocked, absolutely, and everybody gets blocked. But I know that this is another book I need to write because of the way it's coming out onto the page. So I just encourage all you listeners out there to just do it, as they say. Is that the Nike? Just do it. So that's my piece. And thank you to everyone who's out there listening. And thank you for your patience, for putting up with my technical glitches. I can't believe that I think I'm being, what's the word? Sane. That I'm talking to you in a way you can understand, despite being just turned inside out before being able to get on. So thank you all. And I enjoyed Mary Beth and what I heard of you, Walter, and Nora. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We have some questions that have been asked, and feel free to put more in the Q&A function. Let's see. Our first question is for Nora, I think. What does a developmental editor do?
What does a developmental editor do? A developmental editor takes I think of it as taking the big picture of the book, looking at the arc of a plot, character arcs, character development, plot development, just logical things being told in logical order. I have a definition I work with for the structure of a book. I say the structure of a book is the release of information by the writer for the reader. What does the reader know, and when does she know it? So the writer controlling that information and releasing it at just exactly the right time. So that's the arc of the whole book. Those are the kinds of things that I look at as a developmental editor, and try to help the writer do more with character development, do more with plot development, get the timing right, be sure that things are logically consistent. And that can be, if a writer puts a song title or lyric in their book, I'll stop and Google that to be sure it was released at the time of that the story is set in, just those sorts of details. I also recognize that those big picture items may turn on the smallest of points. And I'll mention our experience again, Walter. Walter and I were debating some very, very, very small, little bitty, maybe it was as much as a word, or maybe 4 or 5 words. And I wish I could remember what it was, because it would be a good example to give other people. And finally, Walter said to me, well, who gets the final say? And I had to say, well, the writer does. But reluctantly, I say, well, the writer does. But what I take pride in as a developmental editor is getting people to rethink. It's not that I'm right, but if I can prompt the writer to think more and get a little deeper, go a little deeper, or think, oh yeah, there is another way to say that. Then very often that third way, not what the writer had, not what I suggest, but the third thing that I prompt the writer to go a little deeper and find. That's what I'm after as a developmental editor, and help these good stories get better and make them all good stories well told.
Thanks so much. Let me see. The next question I have is for Walter. The question is, do you view your creativity or writing inspiration as a friend / a different personality, someone that you write for?
You know, as I look back on what I said about that, it sounds kind of crazy. No, not really, but there is sort of another presence there that I feel, in the sense that I feel like I need to be talking to someone. Someone is listening, and of course, there is no one listening other than me. It may be that I used to be an attorney, and you almost have to talk and listen at the same time. And there's always a critical voice in there also watching what you do. So this is probably something that's been with me for a long time. I just, it's a component that I feel like I need to help me do what Mary Beth says, to get in the chair and do it and keep doing it. So yeah, I don't want to be too literal about that, but I hope that answers your question.
I think that's a good job.
Confuses you. No. So
I have a question for Mary Beth. The question is, do you see yourself bringing any of the characters from your story in Fate Havens to a full-length novel?
I have thought about that. I'm certainly writing a novel now that deals with some of the issues in Faith Havens, and but I haven't taken the actual characters and thought about putting them in a novel. But you know, it's out there. So because I do want to see what happens, especially the younger ones. We have the granddaughter and their friends, and what happens to them. So sure.
Thank you. Let's see, I've got a question for Miranda. What advice would you give to someone who wants to write a memoir, but they're afraid to upset friends, family, who it might affect?
That's a really good question. And that's something I worried about. I told the people who were going to be in my book, but wasn't about them, that I was doing it. I told my siblings that I was doing this book, and I would give them pseudonyms, and they wouldn't be in any scenes because they preferred not to be having any part in this book. But I couldn't write it without, I have 3 siblings, and so I couldn't write a story about my father without including the fact that I have 3 siblings. So I gave them pseudonyms, and also my 2 sons, I gave them pseudonyms, though they were just babies toward the end of my book. And I still have trouble with my family of origin. They were quite upset. And so I can't tell you that that's not going to happen, because it does happen. And it happened to me. I haven't lost any friends. I haven't lost any people that I'm close to. And interestingly, the Jewish side of my family loved my book. Several second cousins bought it, and they bought it for other extended family that I never really got to know or meet, because I grew up in Danville. So the only people upset are the Southern Baptist siblings that I have. And I'm sad about that, but there's nothing I can do about it. I needed to write the book. The book was for me. It was my story. If they have a story, they can tell their story. I hope that answers your question.
There's another question for Walter, and that is, what are the themes you find yourself incorporating into your writing the most? Do you have themes that you'd say keep recurring?
There are themes, and they seem to happen whether I intend them or not. One of them is race, and that comes, I think, from growing up in the Deep South and being there at a formative time in my own life when a lot of the civil rights movement was going on. And I think recently, as I've gotten older, and I'm well into my 70s, is the idea of looking back and thinking about the past and the importance of the past, not only my own past, but the past in which I lived, and even before that. So those are 2 that come out. And I would also say, I think that isolation versus community is one that it appears in both of the fiction books I've written. I would not say that these are consciously done, but they come out.
Thank you. And there's, at this point, one more question, but we'd be glad to hear more if anybody else wants to add one in the Q&A. Pardon me. There's a question for all of us. What's our favorite part about being a writer? And I'll venture first, since I've got the microphone, I guess. I would say my favorite part is the sense of communicating to someone, and maybe I'll discover my version of Walter's second self that I'm really communicating with, and that rang true for me. I can see that is the case, that especially with my first novel, where I was working out questions I'd had for so very, very, very long. I really was doing it for my own benefit, but I very much also wanted to connect with readers. And it's that sense of connection with other people that I think is my, at least my greatest satisfaction from it. So Mary Beth, what would you say?
I would say several things, but what comes to mind is just that whole making something out of nothing, that sitting down to the blank page and coming up maybe 2 hours later and just feeling like you really dealt with an issue or a question you had, and I really feel satisfaction in what's on the page. It might go back, like we were talking about, and rewrite it 100 times, but there is a thrill to that, to writing something that you like, that you feel like it says what you wanted it to say, and it's your own secret little pleasure. I mean, when I used to compare it to, it must be like what people are, if you're having an affair or something, and you have this thrill that you can't really talk about, but so it is, it's a real joy. It's difficult, and but that, I just like the writing process.
And Miranda, how would you answer that? What's your favorite part?
My favorite part of the writing process is, right now it's just getting it all down on paper because it's right there. Generally, it's creating something that I can feel good about, that I feel communicates something to the reader, and that engages the reader and makes the reader want to continue on. And that's a good feeling to have, even if it's just a paragraph, that it's a well-crafted paragraph with carefully chosen words. And the first draft can be blah blah blah, and then I go back. I like the editing process quite a lot too. I like finding a different, more pithy word for a common word I've used, and so I'll go back and do that 2 or 3 times. But yeah, it's hard to get myself to sit down at the very beginning, but once I do, I'm in, and I do enjoy it.
And Walter, same question for you, please.
Okay, so yeah, in addition to the connection we talked about, the feeling of connection, there's just a terrific joy in discovering what the story is and working it out. And I'm going to sound crazier and crazier, I guess, but at times it feels magical. I've been stuck in the novel and had a character just walk in out of nowhere and start talking, and I'm writing it down, but I don't really know where the character came from, and obviously from my unconscious. And in a couple of cases, they almost taken over the story. So there's really something almost extraterrestrial about it. And Faulkner said, I'm not creating anything, I'm just writing it down. Well, I don't, as if it came from someplace up in the sky. I don't have that feeling, but sometimes there's just a real joy in the discovery of what's going to happen in your own work. So that's what I would say.
Thanks. There is another question. This is to any or all. In the process of writing a book, when do you know what the transformation will be for your major character or characters? So when do you know what the major transformation will be? I may sound a little like Walter. I know it when I write it, or I know it when I see it. I know that the main character is heading towards something. And I mentioned that one of the things I'll know when I get started on my Pantser adventure, but it's Pantser, but I will have a sense of what I want the truth to be at the end. So it's what is the major character going to have to go through to get to that truth? Again, first draft stuff, often I don't really know until I have written it, but I'll have that held out as a sort of a goal for this character, and then I have to figure out how to get them there. And I know it when it happens, and it's a wonderful feeling. And I have learned to accept the fact that it will happen on its own timetable, and I can't force it. So I just stay with it, and it will happen. I just have to go on that faith. It will happen if I do my part, which is the butt in the chair part. Mary Beth, would you like to speak to that?
I'm thinking you have to trust the novel. That really, the novel has a mind of its own. The story has a mind of its own, and just trust that it will appear to you that if you write enough, and you will, as you both said it, you'll know it when you see it. I usually have an inkling of what's the question, and I have to listen to my characters. And sometimes I just shut, kind of like Miranda was talking about, shutting your eyes and putting yourself in that scene or in that situation and listening to what they have to say and which way do they go. And I do know that transformation is an important part of any story, of course, for the main character to change in some way, maybe even just change by accepting not change, staying the same, but they accept that. So I'm always on the lookout for that. But once again, I'm not sure at the beginning. But it is an exciting moment when you recognize it. And I'll say that also for the end of the novel, or the story, how do you know you're at the end? Again, you just know it when you're there. So I guess that's how I respond to that.
And Miranda?
Well, in memoir, it's not quite the same, but I learned a lot about myself in writing my memoir, and I began to see the trajectory of how I changed and how I came to a point of acceptance and understanding and letting it be so that I could not obsess about it anymore. Let my father be gone and let him be what he was and what he was to me. So in memoir, your character, I think you should also have the person you're writing about or yourself find a meaning and come to a point where they are changing, they do change. And in my book, the last chapter is kind of brings the threads together, the both sides of my heritage. And it is the penultimate bit of my book that I think works very well for that.
And Walter?
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone said. I will, particularly for those of us who sort of create and discover as we go, I would add to that the times that I have tried to force it, not let as Mary Beth says, not let the story, not trust the story to bring this to me or to reveal it. When I've tried to force it were big mistakes. It just never worked. So patience and sticking with it. And, even after Nora had finished her terrific edit on that and taught me so much about my own story, I still was discovering what exactly was going on and where the turning points were. So, yeah, it's not something, I think it's difficult to pin down if you try to do it too hard, to let it happen.
Very good. Thank you. Those are all the questions.
Thanks so much. It looks like we are right over 7:30. So I want to go ahead and close us out. Many, many thanks to our panelists and everyone who helped put this together. Thanks so much. And to everyone who attended. I think this has been really, really great, technical difficulties aside, and everything. And I hope to see you all at the next event, especially when we can do things in person again. Thanks so much and have the best night. Bye, everyone.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.